welcome to the tutorial on how to crochet this cute little granny vest. This is a split colour v-neck granny stripe vest. So I have done this one with stripes, but you can do a solid block colour, or you could do it all in one colour, whatever you fancy. Also, hello, if you don't know me, my name is Rajan, aka Not Half Bad Crochet, and if you enjoy crochet content like vlogs, day in the lives, tutorials, then please consider subscribing to my channel. Obviously, if you enjoyed this video, give it a little like and leave me a comment to let me know what you think. In the tutorial, I will be showing you how to do the striped one. Obviously, if you don't want to do striped, you don't have to do striped. So I will be showing you how to change colour on every 2 rows without having to cut off your yarn, meaning you won't have a bunch of extra ends to weave in. I've done a contrast trim along the edges with a contrasting front tie, as well as around the armholes as well. It's a very simple and easy make, but I would say this is most recommended for intermediate beginners or advanced crocheters. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so let's talk yarn. You can use whatever yarn you like. There is no specific yarn that you need. I will be using a Aran weight cotton yarn, and I will be using 3 colours. You can use 2 colours like I did with my brown and gold one. I'm just going to be using 3 because I'm using up some scrap yarn. So I feel like this is going to be a really good scrappy project as well. Obviously, if you decide to do this all one colour, or you decide to do the split colour situation like I did with my brown and gold one, you don't need to change colour after the end of each row, so you don't need to worry about that. So now you have your yarn, let's get cracking. Okay, so let's talk about measurements. So the way that this piece is constructed is that we have 2 front panels. We have 1 front panel, 2 front panels. On the back, because there is a split down the middle, we do 1/2 of the back piece, and then we do the second half. But when we're doing the second half, we're doing a join as you go method. So we're connecting it to the other half of the back piece whilst we are building it up. Then we are going to connect our pieces at the shoulder and seam up the sides, and then we will finish off by doing our trim around the front of the piece and then around the armholes, and then adding our front ties as well. We are going to be starting with the front panels, and you are going to be making 2 of the exact same in terms of measurement. Obviously, if you want to do a split colour, you will do 2 separate colours. If you want to do stripes, you will be doing whatever colour combination of stripes that you want to do. You firstly want to decide where you want your vest to sit. Mine is cropped, so it sits perfectly at my waist. If you want yours to be longer and sit at your hips, or maybe you want it to be floor length, you can do a mid-axi one, a maxi one. I think that would also look really cute. Just decide how long you want your piece to be. Since mine is going to be cropped, I basically need to figure out what the largest part of my body is from my waist. So for me personally, it is my bust. So you have 2 options in terms of taking your measurement. You can either do it with a tape measure, or you can hold up the actual panel to your body and adjust it that way. So for your foundation chain, what I like to do is to basically take either my measuring tape or my foundation chain and put it directly underneath my armpit, and then wrap it all the way around to the other side directly underneath my armpit. You'll find that on most clothing, you'll have a joining seam just underneath your armpit here. So you can also measure a existing item of clothing that you have that you like the fit of, if you want to get the same fit for that. So taking your tape measure, or whichever method of measuring you want to do, one side underneath your armpit, all the way across your bust to the other side, and once you have that measurement, you're going to divide it by 2. And if you're doing your measurement by having your chain, you're just going to go from underneath your armpit to the center of your chest, and it's going to be this part of the panel that we are working up first. So to begin, we're going to start with a slip knot on our hook, and we are chaining to a multiple of 3 plus 2. When you are chaining, you just want to reach the measurement that I showed you, as we are doing our front panels first. So I'm going to be chaining 36, which is a multiple of 3, and then adding 2 additional chains onto the end. Now you have your chain all ready to go, we are going to just do a row of single crochets. So you're going to skip the first stitch after your hook and work your single crochets into the next stitch along. Okay, so I've just placed my final single crochet into the last chain. This is what your row should be looking like so far. From here, we are going to chain 2 and then turn our work. Next, you want to place a double crochet into that first stitch at the base of our chain. And from here, this is our row repeat, so we are going to skip 2 chains, and in the 3rd chain along we are going to do 3 double crochets, then skip 2 stitches, 3rd stitch along we are going to do our 3 double crochets. So 1, 2 and then 3, 1, 2 and 3. Skip 2 stitches into our 3rd, we're going to do 3 double crochets, and keep repeating that. Skip 2 stitches in the 3rd, do 3 double crochets. And keep doing that until you get to your final cluster of stitches. Okay, now I have reached the end. I have 3 stitches left, and into the final stitch I'm going to just do 2 double crochets. So we're skipping the next 2, and then in the 3rd there's 1 double crochet and 2 double crochets. So for my stripy pattern, I'm going to be doing 2 rows of the granny stitch in green and then 2 rows in my next colour, and then keep alternating 2 rows of each. By doing 2 of each row, it will make it a little bit easier because we can carry the yarn up the side, meaning you won't need to cut off your yarn after each row, and meaning less ends to weave in. So from here we're going to chain 2 and then turn our work, and here is what your row should be looking like so far. Very simply, in every gap that we have just created in between our clusters of stitches is where we're going to be inserting our next cluster. So our first gap is here. We're going to put in 3 double crochets into this gap. Okay, I've come to the end of my yarn, so I'm just going to add some new yarn there. And then in the next gap we're going to be doing our next cluster of 3 double crochets. And then in the next gap another cluster of 3 double crochets, and it is this simple. We're just doing that all the way down until we hit our final gap and our final cluster of 3 double crochets. Okay, so I'm nearing the end of my second row, and so I'm gonna place my final cluster of 3 double crochets into my final gap. And to finish off this row, we're just going to locate the chain 2 from the row below, and into the top of the chain 2 we are going to do our final double crochet. So there's the chain 2, there's the top of the stitch, that's where you want to be inserting your hook. I am going to be changing colour on this row, so I am just going to do an incomplete double crochet so I can add my new yarn. So insert your hook, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through the first 2 loops on your hook. You still have 2 loops remaining on your hook, and now I'm going to introduce my next colour. So you just want to hook the yarn over your hook and pull it through those final 2 loops that are on your hook, ensuring that you have left a long tail for you to weave in later. From here I'm going to chain 2 and then turn my work. Just make sure you don't get your yarn tangled up when you are turning your work, because we're not cutting off our yarn and you don't want it to get all tangled up. From here we are just going to be repeating our first and second row. So if you don't want to rewind the video, or you can't really remember which row you're on, you just have to refer to the row below the one that you're working into. So this is the row that we are going to be repeating. So we want to place 1 double crochet into that first gap. So that is the gap between the first cluster and the double crochet from the row below. And then into our next gap we're going to be doing 3 double crochets. And in the next gap another 3 double crochets. And you want to meet me back at the end when you have done your final cluster. Okay, so I've just reached the end of my row. I've done my final cluster of 3 stitches, and like I said, we're replicating the stitches from row number 1. So into our final gap, which is between the cluster of 3 and the chain 2, we're going to be putting in 2 double crochets to finish this row. So that is row number 3 all done. From here I'm going to chain 2 and then turn my work, and we are replicating our second row. So from here we are just going to be doing a cluster of 3 double crochets into our first gap, and into every gap along the row until we reach the end of our row. There's our first cluster, and keep doing that until you have finished the row and done your final cluster of 3 double crochets. I'm nearly at the end of my row, so I'm going to do my final cluster of 3 double crochets into that last gap. And then finishing off, I will be placing a double crochet into the top of the chain 2 from the row below. But I am going to be changing my colour back to green, so I will be doing an incomplete double crochet, just like we did before. And remember, we didn't cut off our green yarn, that is still attached. So all we're going to do is we're just going to move the working yarn out of the way. We're going to grab the green yarn, which is still attached to our panel, and we're just going to pull it up the side, hook it over our hook, and pull it through the last 2 loops on our hook. You will see that it's being pulled up the side of the panel. You just want to make sure you're not yanking it too hard, because that's going to cause our piece to curl up, and you are just gently pulling it through those 2 loops that were on your hook. So now we have the green yarn back on our hook. We are going to chain 2, turn our work, and we are just repeating that until you reach the next measurement. And every time you are ready to change colors after every 2 rows, the color that you need will be on that side of your panel. So keep working the piece until you reach your next measurement, and then I will show you what to do next. Once you have made your way up, you basically want to decide where you want your v-neck to start. Mine is relatively low. You could do yours higher, you could do yours even lower. It's entirely up to you. So decide how far down you want your v-neck to start, and then at this point, this is where we're going to start our decreases to do our sharp decline to give us that nice sharp v-neck. You also want to keep an eye on where we are approaching to underneath your armpit, because we are creating some armhole shaping to give it that kind of vest look. If you're holding up the panel to your body, you just want to make sure you are reaching just underneath your armpit. I'm just going to show you on the panel that I have done already. This is what my first front panel looks like, and what I want you to do is to mark one of the sides with a stitch marker, a safety pin, a bobby pin, an earring, whatever you have to hand. Just mark one of the sides. The side that you have marked with a stitch marker is going to be the side where we create our v-neck, and on the v-neck part is going to be the center of the actual vest. So with this side, we're going to be decreasing on every turn. So we're going to be decreasing as we approach the end of the row, and also decreasing when we've turned our work and we're working the opposite way. On the other side, we're going to be doing a little bit of armhole shaping, and this is the side that you're going to leave unmarked with no stitch marker. As for this side, we will be working our decreases a little bit later on, but also just on one pass. So it won't be as you're approaching it and as you've turned your work, it will just be as we've turned our work. So you can see the kind of main difference is that this is almost on a curve, and on this side it's a very sharp decrease. So that's the main differences, and that's why I want you to mark one side with a stitch marker, just so you know which side is going to be the v-neck and which side is going to be the kind of armhole shaping. So now I'm going to show you how to do the decreases. It's the exact same principle for the v-neck and for the armholes. It's just that one of them you'll be doing it for both sides, one of them you'll just be doing it for one. Okay, I am ready to start my decreases on one side of my panel, which I have marked with a stitch marker. Usually in this little gap, we would be doing our first cluster of 3 double crochets. So we're going to start off and do our double crochet, but leave those 2 loops on your hook so you have an incomplete double crochet there. And then yarn over again, and in the next gap where we will be placing our next cluster of 3 double crochets, insert your hook into there, and then do your first half of your double crochet. You will then have 3 loops on your hook. You're going to yarn over and pull through both of those loops on your hook. From here, I'm just going to add a stitch marker into the top of that stitch, just so I know where the end of my row is. So that is our first decrease, and then you're just going to continue and do your 2 double crochets into that space, so you have a total of 3, and then carry on along your row like normal. We are just going to be doing our cluster of 3 double crochets into each space along the end of our row. Okay, so I finished off the end of that row just like normal, because remember on this side we are going to have no decreases for now. And then I just changed over colour to my secondary colour, and I'm just going to work the stitches as normal until we reach our final cluster, and then meet me back and I will show you what to do next. I'm just approaching the end of my row, and this is where I'm going to be doing my decreases. So in my final gap I'm just going to do the first 2 double crochets, and then on the 3rd double crochet we're going to do our decrease. So I'm going to yarn over, insert my hook, pull up a loop, pull through the first 2 loops, so I have 2 loops left on my hook. Then I'm going to yarn over and just go into the top of that stitch where my stitch marker is, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, so now I have 3 loops on my hook, yarn over and then pull through all 3 of those loops. From here I'm going to chain 2. You can remove this stitch marker now as well. Turn my work, and then on this turn as well we are also going to be decreasing. So like I mentioned, we are decreasing on the approach and we are decreasing as we turn our work and start this row too. So usually we would insert a stitch into this gap and then we will continue doing our clusters. This time we are going to do our decrease 1 in here and 1 in the next stitch. So insert your hook, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, you have 2 loops on your hook, yarn over and do your first double crochet into the next gap, yarn over the first 2 loops, you now have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over and pull through all 3 of those loops. And now you can put your stitch marker back into that first stitch, so now we know when we are coming back that this is our final stitch. And then just finish off and do your last 2 stitches into that gap and continue the row like normal. And then that's what you're going to be doing for your repeat. Every time you approach the end of this row, you're going to be doing a decrease, and then when you turn your work, you're going to decrease again. You want to continue until you get up to where you are going to be doing the shaping for your armhole, and then I will show you how to also do your decreases for this side as well. Okay, so here are how the decreases on my panel are looking so far. You can see we've got a nice sharp decrease, and this is going to become our V-neck. And so I'm now ready to do some armhole shaping on the other side of my panel, and we're basically doing the exact same as what we did over here, but instead we will only be decreasing on one side of the piece. So I'm going to be decreasing at the start of every row. So when I come back on this side, I'm not going to decrease. I will only be decreasing at the start of the row on this side of my panel. So we'll be doing the exact same thing. So usually I would be putting a stitch into my first gap here, but instead I will be doing a double crochet decrease. So we're going to insert our hook into that gap, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through the first 2 loops. We have 2 loops on our hook. Then I'm going to yarn over, insert my hook into the next gap, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through the first 2 loops. I now have 3 loops on my hook, yarn over and pull through all 3 of those loops. I'm also going to add a stitch marker for this side as well, just so I know where my last stitch is. And then from here I'm going to finish off this cluster and do 2 more double crochets into that gap, and then I'm going to finish off this row as normal, doing my decreases as I have been doing for my V-neck side. So I'm going to finish off this row. I'm then going to come all the way back and then meet me when you are back at that point. Okay, so I'm just approaching the side where I'm doing my armhole shaping, and like I mentioned, when we are coming up to the end of this row there will be no decreases. So into my last stitch where my stitch marker is, I'm just going to do 1 double crochet. I am changing colour on this stitch, so I'm just going to grab my colour 2 and finish off that stitch, and then I'm gonna chain 2 and turn my work. But since we didn't do a decrease at the end of our row, we will be doing our decrease at the start of this row. So we'll just be doing the exact same thing. We're going to start off with doing our double crochet decrease, 1 in that first stitch and then 1 in the next gap. So there's our decrease. I can put our stitch marker back in and then finish off this cluster of stitches in here and continue along my row like normal. And then when I get to this side I will do my V-neck decreases as I have been doing, and you just want to carry on doing your decreases until you reach the width of your preferred shoulder panel. And then once you've done all of your decreases for your v-neck and all of your decreases for your underarm shaping, you will then have the shoulder part. For me, I wanted my shoulder part to be quite narrow. You can do it however wide or however narrow you want. And you just want to make sure that the shoulder part covers the top of your shoulder. As you can see here, we have my v-neck decreases, we have my armhole decreases, and then I got to the width that I wanted. And then I stopped decreasing on both sides and then carried on doing my rows as normal until I reach the height of the panel that I wanted. And then once you get to the end, you can just chain one, cut off your yarn, and then your first front panel is complete. You are then obviously going to replicate this for your second front panel. For your back panel, you have a couple of options. For me personally, my bust is disproportionately larger than the width of my back. So for me, I made my back panels a little bit smaller to kind of account for the fact that my bust is larger. If you are the same and you have a large bust, you want to do this version of measurements. If you are not the same and you don't have a disproportionately larger bust or front part of your torso, whether you've got a larger stomach or bust, whatever the scenario is, you want to do the exact same number of chains for your first half of your back panel. So if you're like me and you are adjusting the measurements ever so slightly, you want to take the measurements of your shoulders. So you want to hold your tape measure against your back, putting it on one side of your shoulder here and running it along the back across your neck to the other side. Again, if you have a piece of clothing with a ideal measurement for you, you can also take the measurement from that piece of clothing. Once you have that measurement, we are going to divide that number by 2 because we are doing one half of the back panel first, and then when we do the second half, we are connecting it to it. Here are both of my front panels all finished, and this is roughly what yours should be looking like. So you have your deep v-neck, you have your arm shaping here, and then this is obviously your shoulder part. And now we are going to move on to the back panel. So the way we construct the back panel is that we are essentially doing one half first, and then when we do the second half, we are connecting it as we go. For the first half of the back panel, you want to start off with the right hand side, and very simply you're going to chain to the same measurement, or the measurement I have shown you, and you're going to work your panel as normal until you reach the same height as when you started doing your armhole shaping. You're not going to do any decreases for the v-neck, you are just doing the armhole shaping. So the first half of your back panel should be completely straight on one side, and then on the other you'll have your armhole shaping. For me, I decreased for 6 rows, so you want to just make sure you decrease for the same number of rows and then carry on as normal until you reach the same height as your front panel. So here is the first half of my back panel all finished. So you can see it is the exact same length, and then I have the armhole shaping, and then I decreased for 6 rows and then carried on to reach the same height as my front panel. Here is my front panel directly next to it, and you can see that when I place it over the top, it matches up exactly. So now you have the first half of your back panel all done. I'm going to show you how to do the second half of your back panel whilst also connecting it and joining it as we go. Now I'm working on the left hand side of my back panel, and I've just done my first row of single crochet, and you will need obviously your other half of your back panel because we are doing a join as you go method. So once I have done my final stitch into the first row of my panel, what we're basically going to be doing is, rather than chaining, we're going to be slip stitching into this panel and then working across the second part of our back panel, working back, slip stitching into the panel, and then just basically doing that until we reach the entire length of the panel. So we've done our last single crochet, and we are going to make sure firstly that our completed back panel, we are working with the straight side. So this is the part with my armhole shaping. This is the center, which is completely straight. So just make sure you're using the right side firstly, and then we are going to locate the single crochet row from our first back panel. So it's right at the bottom there, and we're just going to insert our hook and slip stitch to join those together. And then for our turning chain, we're going to locate the row directly above, and then we're going to locate that first stitch on the side there. So insert your hook basically in between the gap. You can also put it in the actual side of the stitch, whichever you prefer, and we're just going to slip stitch again. So that is our turning chain, and remember we do 2 chains to turn. We have done our 2 chains, the first one into the single crochet row and then the second one into that first row. So from here we're going to turn our work, and then we are going to start our panel exactly as we usually have been for the granny stitch. So I'm going to start with my 2 double crochets into that first stitch, skip 2 stitches, and in the third stitch do my cluster of 3. And then do the exact same thing working along the rest of the row. I'm gonna then chain 2 and turn my work and work down until I come back to the panel. Okay, so I've just made my way back to my existing panel and I finished with my last stitch. So now I need to connect back to this panel, but we are also changing colors. So our first slip stitch is going to be in that gap on the second row, connecting our panel. And then for our second slip stitch, we're going to be moving up to the next row. So you want to just place your hook in between those first 2 stitches, or you can do it into the side of the chain, whichever you prefer. So rather than pulling through with our first colour yarn, we are just going to change colour on this slip stitch. But before we do, you just want to make sure that this working yarn, the green yarn or your first colour yarn, is just pulled forward, because we basically don't want that to be on the outside because it's going to end up showing and we don't want that to happen. So just make sure you're pulling your first colour out of the way, and then now we can connect our second colour. So now I'm going to insert my hook into the side of that stitch from the row above, attach my yarn, and then pull through both loops. From here we're going to turn our work. So we're going to start the row off as normal. I will start off with a double crochet and then do my cluster, and we're just working our stitch pattern as we have been all the way down the row, and then chain 2 and then come back up, and I will show you how to connect a couple more times onto the panel so you know what you're doing. Okay, so I've just made my way back and finished with my last stitch. So now we need to connect back to our panel but also change colours. Obviously if you're doing this in all one colour, you don't need to worry about changing colour yarn, and it will probably be a little bit easier. So we have our connected yarn still from our first 2 rows, and we just want to make sure, because remember this is going to be the outside of the piece, so even though this is our right hand side panel, this is the part that's facing outwards. So we want to just make sure that this green yarn isn't kind of floating too much here. So what I recommend doing is just kind of tucking in your first colour yarn, just so it doesn't kind of show up as much on the outside. So now I'm going to slip stitch back into the panel, into that first stitch. So remember, we need to move our working yarn to the front just so it's out of the way. Then I can grab my first colour yarn, insert my hook into that first stitch, and then pull through with my first colour. And now we have our first colour back on our hook. We're going to turn our work, and then we're going to do our stitch pattern as normal and continue along the row, and then I will show you one last time how to connect back to your panel and also change colour. Okay, so I've just finished up my next row and I've finished with my final stitch. So just a repeat of what we have been doing. So when we come back, our next colour yarn, I'm just going to tuck that inside just so it doesn't end up showing too much on the outside, and then going to slip stitch into the side of our panel to join back onto our panel, and then move our working yarn to the front just so it's out of the way, and we can grab our next colour. So insert your hook into the row above, into the side of the stitch, and pull through with your next colour. Then you're going to turn your work, and we're going to do our stitch pattern as normal. And we're basically just replicating the exact same back panel that we've already done. The only difference is that we are connecting it to our existing one. So you want to just make sure that when you get to the right height that you are doing your arm shaping like we did before. So I did it at about, I think it's like row 12 or 13, decreased for 6 rows, and then I just finished off without any decreases until I reached the right height of my panel. So we're just doing the exact same thing. Only difference is we are connecting it to our existing panel. So once you've made your way to the same height of your piece, then you can cut off your yarns, and then we are done with the back panel. Okay, the back panel is now all finished. You will notice that on the join you'll be able to kind of see the yarn that you carried up. Remember, this is the inside, so it doesn't matter too much. And then on the outside the seam is a little bit more seamless, and you won't be able to see the yarn being carried up the side. So this is what your back panel should look like, and now we are going to connect our back panel to our 2 front panels. So you want your back panel to be the wrong side facing you, so this is going to be the inside, the side that touches your body, and then we want our first front panel, and you're just going to lie it on top, and where we're joining is going to be at the top here on the shoulder part, and then we are seaming up the sides as well. So this part that we've created with the armhole shaping, this becomes our armhole, so this part becomes the side of our panel, and then this is obviously our shoulder. Okay, so now you can see how we're going to be joining it. You basically want to flip your panel so it is the front sides facing each other, so it's essentially inside out. This is the outside of our panel, and here is the shoulder part, and this is where we will be seaming together. We're just going to be single crocheting it together, but you can use your own preferred joining method if you have one. I will show you how to single crochet them together. Okay, so here are both of our panels. We are just going to make sure that they are married up onto the edges, and you just want to insert your hook into that first stitch on one panel and then the first stitch on the next panel. And then we can attach our yarn. You can use a slip knot if you prefer, and you're pulling the yarn through both of those panels. We're going to chain 1 and then single crochet both panels together. And then very simply, you're just going to insert your hook into the next stitch on one panel and then the next stitch on the next panel and single crochet, and keep doing that all the way along the row until you have joined both panels together. I have reached the end. I've done my final stitch. Now I'm just going to chain 1 and cut off my yarn and then pull the tail through, and now both of your panels have been connected. Moving over to the other side of our panel, we are just going to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to grab my next front panel, just make sure it is the right way and both of my armhole shaping sides are connected, and then we are going to do the exact same thing where we attach our yarn into our first stitch, chain 1 and single crochet back into the same stitch, and then single crochet both of our panels together, and then we can cut off our yarn. Okay, so now both of my shoulder parts have been connected. We are going to essentially just twist our work, and then we are going to be joining up the sides of our panel. So you just want to make sure that your piece has not been turned the right way around. The seam is still on the outside, and we are going to be working from the bottom of our piece. So you just want to flip it over and make sure both of your panels are connected in the right place, and we are essentially just joining all the way along here until we get to where we started doing our armhole shaping, which is just here. So where we started doing our decreases basically. So we're doing the exact same thing. We are just going to connect our yarn into our first stitch and single crochet into every stitch, joining both of the panels together. Because on this part of our piece we are working into the sides of the stitches, I would recommend doing 1 stitch per row. So you're doing 1 single crochet for every row that you've done. If you find that your tension is quite tight, I would recommend doing 2 single crochets for each row, otherwise you might end up pulling your piece a little bit taut. So I'm just going to connect my yarn, chain 1, and then single crochet back into that stitch to join both of my panels together, and then insert your hook into the next stitch along and single crochet, next stitch along and single crochet, and you're just doing that all the way up your panel. Like I said, you can do your preferred joining method if you want to whip stitch, slip stitch, whichever you prefer. I personally just prefer doing a single crochet. So if you're like me and you did a color change, and obviously we carried our yarn up the side and we've got tails and stuff, you just want to kind of move your tails out of the way, but you just want to make sure that you are working over the carried up yarn. So this is essentially going to kind of hide that and ensure that we don't see it on the actual piece when it's turned the right way around. So you can see that I'm going into the stitch on one panel, I'm going into the stitch on the next panel, and then single crocheting over the carried up yarn. And you're just going to keep doing that all the way along until you reach the end of your armhole shaping, and then you're going to flip over and do the exact same thing on the other side of your panel. And that's all of the joining all done. So once you've done that, we just have our finishing touches to do around the border and to add our front ties, and our vest is nearly complete. Okay, so now my vest is all constructed. All we've got left to do is basically do a row of single crochet all the way around the top, the bottom, the back of the panel, the neckline, and then around the armholes as well. So I'm going to show you how to do it on the armholes first, and then we can work along the front, and then I will show you how to do your front ties as well. So you want to now make sure that your piece is facing the right way, and the best way to do this is to just double check your seam. So this is my seam the right way. You can see this is the wrong way. So just make sure your piece is facing the right way. And we're going to do our first sleeve finishing touches essentially. So for me personally, I like to do it with the other color on the other side. I think it just looks cooler. Do whatever you feel like. You can add another color here. You can do it with just one of the colors. You can do it the same color, whichever you prefer. So I am going to be using the teal color to do my finishing touches on this side, and then I'll use the turquoise color to do my finishing touches on this side. And you just want to locate essentially the armpit of your sleeve hole. This is the seam where we joined the sides of our panel, and this is where I'm going to insert my hook and attach my yarn. Okay, so I'm going to attach my yarn here, and then we are going to chain one and then do a single crochet back into that same stitch. And very simply, all we are doing is single crocheting into every stitch all the way around our armhole, and that is literally it. We're just single crocheting into every stitch. So I will probably do maybe 1 or 2 rows of this single crochet kind of trim around my armhole. You can do as many rows as you feel comfortable. If you want another extra pop of color, you can do 3 rows. I wouldn't recommend doing anything more than like 4 rows, especially if you're working with a DK or Aran yarn, just because it will probably end up looking a bit bulky. But I think 1 to 4 rows is a good amount. So you're just going to single crochet into every stitch all the way around until you come back to where you started, and I'll show you how to join your round and how to carry on if you want to do more than 1 row. Okay, so I have made my way all the way back around my armhole, and to finish off the round of your armhole, all I'm going to do is locate the first stitch, insert my hook into there, and just slip stitch to join this round. So if I only want 1 row of single crochet, I can now chain 1 and then cut off my yarn. If you want to carry on and continue doing more rows, you're just going to keep doing this. You're just going to chain 1, turn your work, and then single crochet again into every single stitch all the way around. And then once you get back to your starting point, you're going to slip stitch into that first stitch, chain 1, carry on if you want to, or cut off if you want to. And that is basically how we do the trim on our armhole. And once you've done your first armhole, you are going to replicate the exact same thing on your second armhole. Okay, both of my armholes or sleeve holes are now done. I did end up doing just 2 rows, and I cut off my yarn on both sides. And now we are going to be doing our trim around the back of the piece, down the front, our front ties along the bottom as well, and then that's also along the bottom of the back. So if you've done 2 colors or any kind of split color situation, we are basically going to be starting from one side, working all the way down, all the way around across the back, and then stopping until we get to the center of the next color basically. So it doesn't matter which side you start with. I'm probably just going to start with this side, and I'm going to be using my turquoise color to connect on this side of my panel so it contrasts nicely. Basically starting off the exact same way. So I'm just going to insert my hook into that first stitch and then attach my yarn, chain 1, and then single crochet back into that same stitch. And then we're going to single crochet into every single stitch all of the way around. So the main thing when you are doing this is you just want to make sure that the front of the piece is facing you. And so for the left side of my panel, and this is the side that is actually the left, so if I was to put this on my body, it would be on the left side, we are just starting at the back in the middle. The only difference is that when you get to any corners, so we have our first corner, which is the kind of start of the V-neck, we are just going to place 2 single crochets into that corner, and then we're going to continue as normal. And then when we get to the bottom corner here, we're going to do 2 single crochets and then carry on as normal until you get all the way around and you kind of meet in the middle part there. Once you've done that, meet me back and I will show you what to do next. I've just made my way all the way around to the kind of center of my piece piece, I've done my final stitch. And just to show you where I mean about doing the corners, I did two single crochets in that corner at the bottom, and then 2 single crochets in the corner that kind of creates the start of our v-neck. So depending on however many rows of the trim you want to do, if you want to do just one, you would now chain 1 and cut off your yarn. If you want to do multiple, this is what we're going to do next. So all you're going to do is chain 1 and turn your work, and we're going to single crochet all the way back across, but this time we are going to be adding our front ties. So this is the kind of part where you would be adding your ties. I am personally just going to add 1 in this top corner, but if you want to have multiple ties, I would recommend trying it on at this point and just placing a stitch marker wherever you want the ties. So you could have 3, maybe 1 down here, 1 in the center, and then 1 at the top. You could have 2, you could just do what I'm doing and just have 1. So you're going to mark where you want your front ties to be with a stitch marker, and because I am doing just 2 rows, this is where I will be adding my front tie. If you're going to be adding more than 2 rows, you basically want to be adding the front tie on your final row. If you've just done 1 row of trim, the only difference is that you're just going to attach your yarn at the point where you want your front tie to be, and then follow the instructions for what I'm going to tell you on how to do your front tie. So I'm going to work my way all the way back around until I reach my stitch marker where I'm going to do my front tie, and I'll show you what to do next. Okay, so I've just made it back around to my stitch marker. So the next stitch is going to be where my stitch marker has been placed. I'm just going to remove it for now, and then for the next stitch I'm just going to single crochet into there, and from here we're going to add our front tie, and all we're going to do is chain to reach about 20 centimeters. Depending on how thick your yarn is, you can obviously make this smaller, you can make it longer, whichever your preference is. I will probably do around 20 centimeters, and you just want to make sure that you are counting the number of chains that you're doing, because we will be replicating this on the other side, and obviously if you're doing multiple ties, then you want to make sure your ties are the same length. Also, another note is that when you are doing your chains, you want to make sure you are bringing up your loop and making those chains nice and big, because we are slip stitching all the way back down, and if you've done slip stitches before, you know that it can be quite difficult to do into a tight chain. So just make sure you're pulling that loop up and giving yourself a lot of space to be able to enter your hook to do your slip stitches. So from here I'm just going to chain to reach about 20 centimeters. Now I've done my chain, very simply all we're going to do is we're just going to skip that first stitch, and then into the next stitch along we are going to do a slip stitch. And then in the next stitch do a slip stitch, and we're just slip stitching along the chain that we've just created until we are back at our panel. Okay, we've just done our final slip stitch into our chain, and we're just going to slip stitch into the same stitch where we did our single crochet to begin with. Then from here we're just going to carry on as normal and do our single crochets into every single stitch. You do also just want to double check the front tie length, because by doing our slip stitches we would have shrunk our chain essentially. So just double check, give it a try on, see how long it is now, and see if it would comfortably make a bow. So you just want to double check that this is going to be a good length for you. So from here, like I said, all we're doing is single crocheting all the way back around, and once you reach the first stitch that you started with, you're just going to chain 1 and cut off your yarn. Okay, I've made my way all the way back around. I've done my final single crochet, chained 1, and now I can cut off my yarn. This is the first half of the front of our panel all done. We've done our first front tie, and you can see it's a really nice contrast trim around the entire piece. And so now all we've got left to do is to basically do the exact same thing on the other side. The main difference is that you'll probably be starting in a different place. So last time we started on the back, this time you'll probably end up wanting to start on the bottom of the back, because remember we want the right side of the piece facing upwards. So you will just connect your yarn in the exact same place. The main difference is that obviously we want to connect the single crochet rows that we're doing on this side to this side. So when you are connecting your yarn, you just want to do it in the first stitch, but when we are turning our work, rather than chaining 1, we're just going to slip stitch into this first row. Then when we come back around, we're going to slip stitch into the second row, and then that's when we can cut off. But we're doing the exact same thing. You're going to do it for the exact same number of rows. You're going to chain to the exact same number of chains for your front tie, and then that is it. You're just going to cut off your yarn and your piece is complete. Okay, and that is all there is to it. Your granny vest is now complete. You can weave in your ends, and if you want to block it, you can block it. I did block mine just because I prefer doing that with my wearables, but it's completely optional. I would love to see your versions of the granny vest, so please do tag me on social media. You can find my @ in the description, or you can find me at Not Half Bad Crochet. Obviously Obviously, if you enjoyed this tutorial, give it a little like and leave me a comment to let me know what you think, or if you have any questions that I can help with. And of course, whilst you're here, subscribe to my channel. I have a bunch of other fun tutorials and cozy crochet day vlogs, day in the lives, and a bunch of other crochet content. Thanks so much for hanging out with me and crocheting the granny vest, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one.